Hi everyone and welcome. My name is Joe Brady and I'm here today to talk about creating and adjusting profiles for fine art prints. In essence, what went pretty good just isn't good enough. If you're interested in creating prints for display in clients' homes and or commercial settings, then getting the best possible color reproduction should be one of your goals. Now today's program is a little bit more focused than the sessions that have led us to this point. We're going to explore some of the challenges that are specific to what are considered gallery fine art prints. Now we need to define what we're after. Also, I want to give you a note that there's some good, there's some bad, and there's some downright ugly stuff going on with some of the new operating system upgrades. And I found one of my printers works great, and one of them has become an absolute disaster because the printer drivers haven't come up to par with the new operating system. So we'll discuss that in a bit. So again, what do we define as a gallery quality print? Well, this print can be summed up as having a handful of attributes. First, color and tonal accuracy are critical. Both the correct rendering of the colors and the tonal range need to work together to ensure not only that accuracy, but smoothness of gradations and clear details in both highlights and shadow areas. In fact, just last night I printed some images on my Canon IPF 6350, and actually images like this one here give you trouble. When you have something like a solid blue background, a solid blue sky with a very fine gradation from dark to light down the horizon, that's actually a big challenge for your printer, and you need to make sure that your color is perfect for that. Now, all this might sound like a pretty basic thing to ask, but it's not always easily achieved. To make this happen consistently, you need to have three things. One, your quality monitor needs to be accurately calibrated and profiled. And you see I've got my laptop here on the set, but it is hooked up to my good monitor. This is an AZO CG241W. There's no escaping. A good monitor is going to be an investment. It's going to cost you some money. If you've got, I see this all the time, people with $2,800 camera bodies and $2,000 lenses, and then some $249 monitor they picked up at a discount store. Where do you think that weak link is? You've got to invest. If you're into serious graphic editing, you've got to have yourself a good monitor. Expect to spend $700 and $750 or up to get there. There are no laptops with great monitors. There's some that have okay monitors, but there's some that are just plain bad. If you bought yourself a discount laptop, I can guarantee you the monitor is going to be bad. Even this MacBook Pro, which is a decent machine, is still very limited in what it can do. Even the new Retina displays, as good as they are, they're still only sRGB displays. So you need to have a good monitor. Next, you need to have an accurate and preferably custom paper profile so that the colors in your image will translate into the best possible reproduction on the paper you're using. And third, and I mentioned this before, and this has driven me nuts the past couple of days, your driver, your printer driver, has to be updated to perform correctly with your current OS. Now, I have to admit I haven't kept track of what's been going on at Windows that much, but on the Mac side, OS 10.7, 10.8, and 10.9, particularly the new release of Mavericks, has wreaked havoc with color and some printer drivers, particularly if you have an older printer. Now, over on my desk, I have an older Epson 2880. And with Mavericks, what I originally thought it was going to be printing okay because the driver showed up, it's completely ignoring the profiles. It's the colors all over the place. It's actually, at this point, rendered that printer unusable until the new printer driver comes out. Usually, I don't typically jump into a new operating system when it comes out. For me, it's a balancing act. I know a lot of you guys like to jump into the newest software. So I'm actually going to claim that I upgraded to Mavericks because I want it to be at the absolute leading edge so I can keep up with you guys. I need to listen to my own advice. It was a really bad idea. Never jump into the first iteration of a new operating system. Give it a couple of generations so that all the drivers catch up. So I wish I wasn't there, but I am. The machine's going to stay there. So my Canon driver works fine. It's actually an export module in Photoshop that I use for my printing. It works beautifully. My Epson driver for the older Epson printer, it's a disaster. So just keep that in mind. So let's review a little bit first. Let's go back to profiles. What is a profile? And what types of profiles are we dealing with today? Now, a profile, and you can say ICC profile if you want to be technically accurate, It's a file that contains information about how a device reproduces colors. More easily put, an ICC profile contains all the colors that can be reproduced on a certain output device. In our case, I'm using an inkjet printer or the monitor. All of the colors together in this profile make up the color space or gamut of the device. In essence, kind of think of how many crayons are in your box. How many colors and what range can I reproduce? Now we're dealing with both monitor and paper profiles today. The monitor profile ensures that our monitor is displaying the best accuracy and luminance possible within the ability of the monitor. If you have an inexpensive monitor, that's going to be limited, and it's also going to vary from edge to edge. A professional graphics display will eliminate that problem. Now, our paper profile gives the information necessary to translate the colors in the digital image file to the best possible reproduction on that particular paper. As our image takes its journey from capture to edit to print, it's going to travel through devices that have differing abilities of displaying and outputting color. So simply put, what a profile does is it translates color from one device to another according to each device's color and tonal capabilities. So I'm going to add one more element to today's discussion, and that is adjusting a paper profile to actually a specific light source. This advanced step allows you to adjust the color response of a profile by countering spikes and dips in the spectrum of light shining on a photograph. So why might you want to do this? Each light source we encounter has a different spectrum of light that it puts out. For example, here in the studio we've got tungsten lights. They have a very strong yellow component that becomes more obviously seen when you put a dimmer on a standard light bulb. Now, fluorescent tubes have many different possibilities depending on the tube. Is it a daylight tube, cool warm, a cool white, a warm tube? Each of these light sources have colors in their spectrum that are strong or weak. For example, standard fluorescent tubes have a very strong green spike in them. If you use this type of light to illuminate a print, that extra green starts to cancel out its opposite color. In this case, that would be magenta. So if your particular image contains a lot of magenta, that color is going to lose saturation when viewed under standard fluorescent tubes. By adjusting a profile for this type of light, the print under those lights ends up looking as if you were viewing it under standard daylight. What generally happens in this case is that the offending color is subtracted from the print, provided it is a component in the print in the first place. Then when the light adds that extra green back onto the print, it's back to normal viewing color. This may sound all a bit techy, but if you're creating gallery quality prints to be installed in a commercial or residential space, knowing these options will allow your print to look its best under the light source that's going to be used. By the way, I have found this procedure to be more important for fluorescent lights. While tungsten light does add an extra yellow, this isn't usually a detriment. It adds warmth to the image, and to our eyes it actually still looks normal. The exception might be some seascapes and bright blue skies, as the extra yellow might start to cancel out some of the blue. And you see these prints behind me, each with a strong blue component in them. We're looking at them under tungsten lights, which are fairly yellow, but in this case, the video camera white balances for these, so it all kinds of evens out. Now, if you're preparing prints for sale, and you have no idea what the light source is going to be that's going to illuminate that print, then the best you can do is produce an image that is accurate under normal daylight viewing. And this is considered D50 lights. We'll see more about this when we go into the i1 Profiler software. If you're actually doing the installation in the commercial or residential setting, and you can find out what type of lights are going to illuminate the print, then you can either measure the light or use one of the standard adjustments found in the software. And it's actually very easy to do. We'll see it in a second. So here's what we're going to do today. First, we're going to profile our monitor with the i1 Pro 2, which I have right here, and i1 Profiler software. I'm not going to run through the entire process. I'm going to kind of squeeze it quick together just so you can see the highlights. Then we're going to create a custom paper profile. After that, we'll take the software, the i1 Profiler software, and take one of our profiles and adjust it to a specific light source. So let's start with the monitor. Let's see a quick view of monitor profiling with the i1 Pro 2. All right, now the first thing we need to do when we're in i1 Profiler is tell it we're using an i1 Pro 2, not the i1 Display Pro. So let's go ahead and do a monitor calibration real fast. So we go to monitor display profiling, and we're going to not do a saved luminance, but we're going to actually measure. So I click on next, and then we have other profile settings, and again, I'd recommend you stick with the defaults. The one thing I've mentioned in the past, that is if you have an older operating system, you may prefer to choose version 2. This will be obvious if you look at an image under two different color spaces and they're extremely different. Chances are it's a version 4 profile problem. So version 4 is for the current operating systems, but if you're a couple back, you might want to stick on version 2. Now I'm running OS X Mavericks right now on this particular laptop, so we're just going to go with version 4 because that is up to date. By the way, as you're doing any of these procedures in i1 Profiler, you don't have to keep going back and setting them each time. At any time you want, you can save what you're doing. I'm just going to call it my default settings and bring that back at any time. So then I'll click on next. And we have an option of how many patches do we want. I have small, medium, and large. There's medium at 211, large at 462. What I'm going to do is, just as a test, I'm going to go ahead and let it do its 462 patches. I'm going to profile that. Then I'm going to compare it to the small set, and then I'm going to take a look at the profiles and see if the 462 patch set out of this particular monitor was able to squeeze anything extra out of it. So let's go ahead and do that. So I click on next as the device needs to be calibrated. I've got the i1 Pro 2 on its little calibration target, so I can just click on calibrate, and it says the device is ready. So we've got it calibrated. Now it's time to start the measurement. So we start the measure. You might notice your screen changes color because what it just did was it turned off the existing profile and it's reset. So I need to hang the device from my screen, just like you see on the picture there. And then I'll click next. Now it's going to do its thing. It's going to go ahead and do the automatic display control, measure the brightness and luminance, and then it will do all those patches. So we'll speed this up so it happens real fast, and then we'll come back. All right, so our monitor profile is done. Let's go ahead and click next. We'll give it a name. I'm calling it i1 Pro 2 Large for the large patch set, and we'll create and save that profile. So we've got our monitor profile. Now we can go back to home, and it's time for printer profiling. Alrighty, a couple questions I want to address before we continue on. Someone's having problems with a specific printer where they're having an error that the margins for the paper aren't cooperating. Unfortunately, for individual printer specific things, I can't offer you a lot of help. There's so many different drivers, so many different printers out there. All of these devices, however, are designed to print 8.5 by 11 letter size pages, whether it be a ColorMonkey Photo or the i1 Display Pro. Here's one of my targets that I printed yesterday. This is one of 2 pages for the Epson that I printed on. And 8.5 by 11, that's all I can tell you. If you're having problems with size, and it's a printer driver issue, and you'll have to look into that. Someone asked specifically about some of the paper scanner. We're going to do a printer profile in just a second, so stay tuned. Someone also asked if I could recommend a lamp brand. Yeah, that I actually can. If you're going to install gallery quality prints or really high-end prints in either a commercial setting or a residential setting, take a look at Solux. It's S-O-L-U-X. I think it's .net, but if you just Google Solux lamps, it'll take you to the website. They have some D50 lights, tungsten lights. I think they technically come in at 4,800K or so, but they're UV filtered also, so it takes the UV component out, and they're really beautiful for displaying artwork. So take a look at it. They're not ridiculously pricey, and if you're putting an expensive piece of imagery up, it's a worthwhile investment. Now, someone said, it took 25 minutes to profile the monitor. How long does it take for the ColorMonkey? The reason it took 25 minutes, really what I did there was almost an academic exercise for me. I went ahead and profiled my laptop display with the large patch set. I did that so I could compare it to a standard profile created with an i1 Display Pro or a ColorMonkey display or a ColorMonkey photo. I wanted to see if there was a difference. And actually, you kind of led me right into that. What I'm going to do is take a look at the profile that was just created. I'm going to use the Mac utility software called ColorSync that allows you to look at and compare profiles. So let's take a look at that, and then we'll come back and explore some more. Let's take a little closer look at our monitor profile. I'm using a utility on the Mac called the ColorSync utility, and it allows me to look at and compare profiles. Here's the profile we created using that large patch set. And we can spin it around and see it in three-dimensional space, and that's nice, but it doesn't really tell us anything until we compare it to something else. So let's click on here and tell it to hold for comparison. So let's compare it to one that I had done earlier just using an i1 Display Pro to see how it compares. So I click on i1 Display Pro Color LCD, and I see that, well, they are pretty darn close. The original large patch one is in the white underneath there. So we're seeing it squeezing a little bit more out. And actually, one exception is the basic patch set actually gave us a little bit more in the deep blues and the deep reds. Now, what the higher patch set is doing is it's actually giving us a more accurate reading, but these two profiles are so close as to be indistinguishable. Just the temperature of the monitor can cause more variation than what we're seeing here. In this case, for doing a laptop, the short answer is, if you're profiling your laptop, you're not going to see a difference in quality on the profile between the small and large patch set. That's going to be something reserved for when you go to a professional level monitor. Let me clear this. Here's our large patch set profile, and we can compare it to sRGB because most laptop monitors are sRGB or near to it. So when we overlay sRGB and spin this around, we can see, well, in the white, which was our large patch set, we can see that it has gotten us a little bit more than sRGB on the greens, orange, and yellows, and actually a little bit all around except for these bright greens and blues. sRGB has a little more. So when you see a monitor that says it contains 99% of sRGB, this is what it's showing you. It might be missing a little bit, but it might be actually giving you a little bit more color than sRGB contains in certain part, and that's what we're seeing here. Now, if we compare it against an Adobe RGB monitor, a professional monitor like our AZO CG241 we have, let's hold the AZO. Here's the AZO display profile, and let's overlay our large patch set for the laptop, and you can see how much bigger a color space the AZO has. Now, interestingly enough, our laptop actually is able to show a little bit more blue than the 100% Adobe RGB AZO does. So this is just showing you how the variations in color spaces are going to affect your editing decisions, because if you've got an image that's got colors out in here and you're trying to edit it on your laptop, you're not going to see those changes. That is the beauty and advantage of having a high-end Adobe RGB monitor like the AZO that we've got here on our set. Okay, a couple more questions before we continue. Let's see. So someone asked, what monitor settings do I use when calibrating with the i1 Pro, for example, the luminance? Well, if you've got a monitor that is ADC compliant, which is most current monitors are, you don't have to set anything. The software is going to take control. On an AZO monitor, which is what I use here, the AZO has a button, and if you cycle through the choices, one of them says Cal for calibrate. You can go there, or you can go to one of the other ones that has a color temperature and a brightness value. Typically, for my graphics monitor, I like to be in a dark enough environment that I can have my luminance set at 80 candelas. If I was in a brighter environment, maybe I'll go up to 100. 120 is my ceiling. I will not go above that on anything I'm doing serious editing on. But at my home studio, all my monitors are set to 80 candelas. And someone asked what monitor I use. I use AZO CG241s. It's not the latest one, but AZOs last a good long time. So someone asked, is my Canon 6350, was everything work in Mavericks? I can't say about everything yet. I was printing on it last night, and I did see that my Photoshop plugin works perfectly. There's an advantage when you've got a printer that uses a plugin rather than relying on a printer driver, because all the color stuff is happening in Photoshop. So even though I'm working in Lightroom on some of my images, with that particular printer, I open up in Photoshop and then send them out with the export module. So it bypasses all of these operating system glitches. I'll have to try printing directly from Lightroom to see if it's a problem on Mavericks. That is a newer printer though, so it should be okay, but no guarantees. I can promise you that the plugin module does work just fine though. All right, let's continue on, a couple more, then we'll get some more questions. So back to our monitor calibration. And yes, I did the 25-minute one. It didn't need to be that long. If you use a Color Monkey photo, it takes maybe a minute. The Color Monkey display and the i1 Display Pro, a couple minutes. They're much quicker than that if you're using the smaller patch sets. However, what it turned out to happen is the laptop didn't have enough color space and quality to take advantage of those extra patches. I'd reserve this function to a professional grade monitor if you really want to take advantage of the increase in color accuracy you get from using 400 plus patches instead of the smaller patch set. And again, as I said before, you get what you pay for in monitors. I'm obviously a big fan of the Azos. The higher end NEC monitors are real nice, and I'm sure there's a couple of others. Oh, one other thing about profiles. When you go through the profile setup, one of the questions that you'll see come through that I usually blow through is version 4 versus version 2 profiles. Now, version 4 is the latest. It's been around for a couple of years and is supposed to be more accurate. However, version 2 has been around for much longer. A lot of softwares haven't kept up with this, and some of the operating systems haven't kept up with this. If, for example, you look at an image and you look at it and you bring it in Photoshop and you look at it in ProPhoto RGB and you look at it in sRGB and you get a big color shift, you've got a profile version problem. If you ever run into any kind of problems like that, or maybe the monitor goes a weird color, all of a sudden it goes pink, you have a profile version issue. So what you'd probably want to do is go back to version 2. It's going to be safer. For most of the cases, although I've used version 4 on Mavericks for my monitor, it seemed to work okay. For everything else, I've left my profiles at version 2 because it works backwards much better. All right, so now that our monitor is profiled, now we're going to take a closer look at creating a custom paper profile. For fine art papers, this is something I've found to be a great benefit. A paper profile for your specific printer paper combination translates color from your digital image file into the best match possible on your printer. Now, I don't know how well this will show up. I'll just bring it up real quick. Actually, Jen, I'm going to ask if you would just show my laptop screen for a second. So here's one of the images I was working on just last night. This is Balancing Rock in Arches National Park. I've got it on my Calibration. Now, this is my laptop you're just looking at, and we're broadcasting, so I'm not sure how good it'll look to you. But then if we come back to live, and you can see I've got that image printed right here. And when I look at my laptop to this print, it's a pretty darn close match. And by having that custom profile for the paper, it does that translation from my computer into the printer. For example, if your image contains a deep dark red that is beyond the paper's capabilities to produce it, that's what a profile is going to do. It's going to move that color to the closest tone and color that is printable. That's the beauty of having a custom paper profile. Now, in addition, since many colors and tones are sampled when a profile is created, then you get an actual accurate tonal curve. This means you're going to get the smoothest distribution and gradations from light to dark. Even if you're a black and white printer, it still applies. And again, that's why I didn't have to worry about, in this particular image, I didn't have to worry about banding, because I had an accurate profile that generated a perfect tonal curve so that this blue sky is perfectly smooth. Now, understanding the importance of using a paper profile, well, why would you want to create your own? Why not just use the profiles made from either the printer manufacturer or from the paper supplier? Now, using factory profiles is certainly much better than not using a profile at all. I found that factory profiles for glossy and pearl or luster surface papers are usually pretty good, and they've closely matched what I've created using my tools. Fine art papers, however, completely different story. Now, the limitation of factory profiles is that they're generic in nature. They're created using assumptions about temperature, humidity, altitude, and how a certain printer delivers ink to the paper. For some reason, fine art papers seem to be much more sensitive to variations. And because of the need to be safe for every printer that's out there, they're very conservative by nature. The result is you're probably not getting all the color and tonal range out of your printer and paper that it's capable of producing. I found that my printers are capable of printing a much deeper black than the factory profile allows for. Since these factory profiles have to play it safe to be accurate, they have to give you some wiggle room for these different conditions. But by having a custom profile, you're creating something that is specifically for your printer in your environment. Now, I use the i1 Pro 2 system for this, and one of the great capabilities I love about using this system is the i1 Profiler software. You can decide how many patches you want in your profile, and you can get the best result for your printer-paper combination. In general, the larger the paper size and the bigger the print, the greater the benefit of adding more color patches. Now, there's a practical limit to how many patches are useful. You'll see in the software you can add, if you want to print 6,000 patches, you can do that, but some softwares balk at that kind of size of profile. So I like to find kind of a happy medium, and I'll do 1,200 patches, maybe 2,400 patches if I'm feeling in a super accurate mood. The i1 Profiler software, as I mentioned earlier, also allows you to adjust the profile to a measured light source. Like I have these tungsten lights here, so that it'll let the software make adjustments to how the colors are mapped on the final print. So let's go into i1 Profiler with the i1 Pro 2 and create a custom paper profile first. Now that our monitor is profiled, we can go ahead and create a custom profile for our paper. Now I'm using Ilford Gallery Prestige Fine Art Textured, one of my favorite fine art papers, and I'm going to print this print on an Epson 2880 using matte black ink. So if I come over to the printer section, you can see I had already saved this printer. There it is in my list of printers, our 2880 matte black. And what we're going to do is create a profile. So you see profiling here. Let's go ahead and choose that. And it asks me how many patches do I want to do. And you can do kind of actually a ridiculous kind of number. In fact, if you do 6,000 patches, the profile is going to get very large, and some softwares will not recognize it. I don't think this is necessary. I'm going to speed it up. I like to do between 2 and 4 pages worth of patches. So I'm going to choose something that'll just fit on 2 pages. I find that 1013 is a nice number. It'll give me 2 pages worth. And again, I can save this, and I'll save it as my Epson default. And then I can continue on. And the nice thing about doing this, every time I want to create a profile for one of the fine art papers on that printer, I can go back and I have my patch set already sitting there waiting. Then I click on Next, and it tells me to print out the chart. I am using 8.5 by 11 paper, and I'm just going to go ahead and click Print. So I click on Print and I choose my printer. I don't actually have my printer right here right now. It doesn't matter. I actually have my targets already printed, but that's what I would do. Just click on Print, and do make sure that your preset matches the settings on the paper. So make sure you're printing on fine art paper, and oh, by the way, always check this. Go into Print Settings and make sure that are off. You don't want the printer driver to be adding any flavors to your print. All right, again, as I mentioned, I've already got my print, so I'll click on Cancel, and I can just click on Next, which will take me to the measurement spot. And once again, just like when we did our monitor, it asks us to calibrate the device. So I'll put it on its target, click on the Calibrate button, and let it do its thing. Oh, by the way, you do have an option up here. You can do spot measuring, where you'd actually stop and spot measure every little patch. Well, that would take a long time. I'm going to do single scan, and what it allows me to do is to just drag across the page. So after you've read in all of your patches, now you can tell it what your lighting is. Now I can have it for any of these default lightings, and it might not be particularly helpful if you don't know what these numbers mean. So for example, we know D50 is kind of a standard daylight, but what is D55? What is D65? Well, let's go ahead. I'm just going to jump into Safari here a minute and look at Wikipedia, and this is just a listing of standard illuminants, and you can see what D50 means. It means horizon light. D55 means mid-afternoon or mid-morning. D65 is noon at daylight. It's also the sRGB color space default, by the way. And D75 you see, and then you see all these F numbers, and these are the different choices for fluorescent tubes. So if you can find out specifically what type of fluorescent tube is in there, whether it be a standard white or warm white or daylight or a cool white, you can put that number in and it will adjust the profile to that. So if we do D65, which would be noon light, you can see here's the actual spectrum of that light. But let's take a look and see one of these F numbers. Let's choose, let's say for example, just a standard white fluorescent tube, which would be an F3. So if we go in here and choose F3, look at the spectrum of the light, and we see there's that big spike in green. There's another big spike in the green that's almost yellow, and there's a big spike in blue here. And if we don't counteract those big spikes, it's going to affect the color of our print. So we have the choice of either taking one of these standard illuminants that are provided in the software, or you can measure. So here right in my studio, what I can do is I've got some tungsten lights in here. I can actually take a measurement. Now I aim it at the target light source, and again in this case it's my tungsten lights in my studio. So let me go ahead and just click on measure, and I can save this and I'll call it Studio Tungsten. Hit OK. And you can see again it's a very different light spectrum compared to the office fluorescent tubes. Look at the difference in the light. I can see my Studio Tungsten is actually a much more linear light. However, it's really lacking in blue, and that's something we expect out of a tungsten light. So with our lighting, we've now measured in the Studio Tungsten light. Now we can click on Next. We'll use the defaults for tables and settings. I wouldn't recommend going into that point. And then call it a name, and I'm going to call it 2880 for the printer, Fine Art Textured, Tungsten Studio. So what this allows me to do is to create a print that the colors will be adjusted just for this light. Then I would create and save the profile, and that's what I can apply when I go out to my printer. It's going to adjust for this light and add blue to counteract the very yellow nature of this light. All right, so we've got a couple questions here. First one, someone said they have the i1 profiler system. They wanted to know, can you print your printer patches and save them to a file while the ink dries overnight before reading the patches? The answer is yes. As you're going through, you can save the patches that you sent to your printer as a file. In fact, you can save your readings after you read them in if you wanted to come back and make adjustments to them later. That's, again, one of the beauties of the software. Here's an interesting question, and it's actually a good one. Someone asked, what's the difference between fine art photography and any other photography? Really, fine art photography means it's a piece that is going to be destined for sale. Really, it's really the biggest issue. And that has some things that go along with it. As I mentioned, color accuracy. If it's going to be printed in multiple series, you want to be consistent. Each print needs to look exactly or as close as possible to each other. You've got to have a good tonal range. You've got to have very fine gradations. You don't want to have any banding. But any image could end up being fine art print if it's designed and destined to be sold as a photograph to a consumer. Good question, though. Someone asked if I use the Azo's Color Edge software or the X-Rite software for the Azo monitor. I actually use both. I've tried them both. With the i1 Profiler software, I get a really good result. The Azo software works well. It's personal preference, really. So, all right, let's continue on. We've created our custom profile. How do we know they're any different or any better than the factory profiles? Well, we saw in the ColorSync utility a comparison of the basic patch set for the laptop monitor versus the big patch set. Let's use ColorSync utility again. This time we're going to take a look at a custom profile versus a factory profile downloaded from a website. Now, for Windows users, I understand there's a program called ICC Profile Inspector that would let you do the same thing. You can Google it by name. Now, while this may seem somewhat of an academic exercise, when you see two profiles compared to each other, It makes it easier to visualize what's happening to color when it's being translated into your printer's paper combination color space. Let me show you what I mean. Let's take a look at this utility in action. Let's take a look at a custom versus a factory profile. Now for a more dramatic result, let's take a look at our custom profile that we created for the printer versus the one that the factory supplied. Now here's a fine art textured matte black profile for the Epson 2880. So again, we can spin it around and that's nice. It doesn't tell us a lot by itself, but let's compare it. So we're going to hold for comparison and we're going to go get the factory download profile. Now factory profiles are typically pretty good, but with the fine art paper, they're not coming close to squeezing out the amount of color that's actually in the paper. So here's the download of the fine art textured profile for this printer, and look at all the color that's missing. That white ghosted area is the profile that our custom profile created with all those patches. The factory profile is saying that you can't get anywhere near this dark, and the problem will be if you have colors in your print that are in this area, they're going to be moved up into what it considers this printable area based on the rendering intent. So what that's going to mean is you're going to get much less dense blacks, much less dense colors, and you're really giving up some color. So what it's saying again here is my printer on my paper can print much more color than is being allowed through the factory profile in this case. That is the big advantage of having a custom profile, because you can really squeeze out all the capabilities of the paper and get a much better print, because all the colors are going to be mapped correctly to their greatest range and greatest gamut possible. So we're back live. A couple of you have questions that are very specific in nature. You have a very specific computer, operating system, printer combination. If that's the case, we'll give you an email address in our follow-up email that has the link to the recording so that you can send those kind of specific questions. So we took a look at our factory versus our custom profile, and as you can see, wow, big difference. The custom profile got so much out of the paper compared to the factory profile, and having that information and having that place, particularly in the deep colors, allowed the software to map those deep colors and take advantage of that space. If you would use the factory profile in that case, those deep colors that were in the bottom of the profile, but that did exist in the image, some of the image files. Again, you can see this Monument Valley shot, there's a lot of deep, dark foreground here. If you'd used the factory profile, those dark colors would have gotten moved up and mapped into a lighter space, and it would have made for a very different print. By having a custom profile, we took full advantage of what the printer-paper combination could do and got a much better result. Now, I realize this was a lot of info in a short period of time. As I mentioned, we'll send out a follow-up email with a link to the recording, along with some helpful links that you can find some more information. I want to make clear that your final print is only as good as its weakest link, and getting your color under control is the first step. If you want to create consistently great prints, this is an extremely important process. To make this work best, as I mentioned also earlier, make sure all your drivers are updated, because it may become necessary to reprofile, create new printer profiles as operating systems and printer drivers change how they deal with color. But all of this color management adds up to one big advantage. You can stop guessing and you can start knowing. With your monitor calibrated and an accurate custom paper profile in hand, you're on your way to consistent and reproducible color. And that means ending frustration, saving time, and saving money. The end result is prints that closely match the image on your monitor, and that's the payoff, and you get it each time. So that's it for today. I'd like to thank everybody at X-Rite for sponsoring us and getting this whole series going. So until next time, great holiday. By the way, we got Thanksgiving coming up. Happy Thanksgiving to everybody. I hope to see you back here again soon after the holidays. Till next time, be well. Bye-bye.